type for concerned parents groups, right? Exercising their First Amendment rights. But they're just the latest in a nightmarish series of events happening in not so slow motion. From the Washington Post, quote, in Illinois, a man was arrested for striking a school official at a September board meeting. In Hilton, New York, 3 people arrested at a school board meeting last month. 1 for allegedly refusing to put on a mask. 2 for allegedly refusing to leave after the school board president suspended the meeting because of attendees' unruly behavior. In Pennsylvania, a Republican candidate for Northampton County Executive said at an August rally that he would bring 20 strong men to the next school board meeting so they could replace board members with 9 parents, and we're going to vote down the mask mandates. This is how you get stuff done, he said. Now, security warnings are blaring again. A brand new intelligence bulletin from the Department of Homeland Security yesterday revealing this, quote, domestic extremists continue to exploit false narratives to promote violence online, calling for attacks on members of Congress and public health and school officials, even as they share information about how to build bombs. Beyond the threats and violence, though, there's what is relatively more subtle, yet perhaps more widespread. It's an effort on the right, targeting what kids learn, specifically what books they read. After the Virginia election hinged, at least in part, on a controversy over the Pulitzer Prize-winning Toni Morrison book, Beloved, districts across our country, in state after state after state, are in the process of censoring books they find objectionable. One of the more extreme examples, again in Virginia, a pair of conservative school officials not satisfied with simply banning the books that they deemed sexually explicit, but from the Fredericksburg Freelance Star, quote, 2 board members said they would like to see the removed books burned. Quote, I think we should throw those books in a fire, one of them said. And the other said he wants to, quote, see the books before we burn them so we can identify within our community that we are eradicating this bad stuff, end quote. Burning books, threatening school board members. It's where we start this hour, some of our favorite reporters and friends. Yumi Shalcinder is here, White House correspondent for PBS NewsHour, moderator of Washington Week, and an MSNBC contributor. Also joining us, Christopher Goldsmith, an Iraq war veteran and former U.S. Army sergeant. He monitors domestic extremism and national security issues and knows a lot about where they find each other online. And Jennifer Jenkins is here. She's a member of the Brevard County, Florida School Board. Jennifer, I start with you. We talked to you around a specific incident that you were involved in, but I wonder, as the national climate has seemingly worsened, how you're doing.
I'm doing okay. You know, the threats haven't stopped. They've amped up. I got a pretty explicit email just a couple of days ago that, you know, directly impacted someone very close to me as well. The threats are real. Unfortunately, they've become violent and threaten my life and people around me. It's scary. It's really scary.
How are you protecting yourself and your family?
I'm constantly in contact with different law enforcement agencies and just keeping them abreast on everything I receive and everyone who communicates with me, even if it's just, you know, slightly off-colored language. I go ahead and forward it to them just to make sure that they're aware of the people who are threatening me. And I make sure that the security at our school board is aware of it as well. Just because, you know, these people can come as members of the public and attend any of our meetings. And I just want to keep everyone abreast of all the threats that I've been receiving.
Do you ever think that it's not worth it and you don't want to do this anymore?
I totally have moments of that, but overall, no. I mean, absolutely not. You know, here in Brevard in Florida, I was a huge proponent for putting masks on our students and keeping them safe. You know, we had thousands of positive COVID cases, and I know that my effort in pushing forward potentially, you know, saved the lives of so many in this community, and I'll never regret that. And I was here to stand up for our LGBTQ students and for equity across the district going forward. So, you know, it's awful. I wish it would go away. I wish it wasn't my life. It wasn't impacting my life and my family, but I don't regret being here.
I want to Pull you, Yamiche, and you, Chris, into this conversation with some of this Washington Post piece from our friend Aaron Blake. He writes this: it's easy to caricature a particular movement with some of its most extreme promoters, and there is a demonstrated history of effects to ban books in schools, including by liberals. Such efforts have often involved classics such as Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, To Kill a Mockingbird, and Of Mice and Men for their depictions of race and use of racist language more commonly used at the time the books were written. More recently, conservatives have often challenged books teaching kids about LGBTQ issues, but advocates say what's happening now is more pronounced. Yamiche, what is your understanding of whether the sort of administration has a handle on just what's happening, because so much of education is obviously a local issue?
It's a really important question, Nicole. And in some ways, I want to just start by saying, the fact that Jennifer Jenkins is here saying that she is serving despite the threat that she's getting, in some ways, it underscores what America is requiring of its greatest citizens right now. That this is someone who is putting her family's life on the line to keep kids safe in the middle of a pandemic. That is, in some ways, it gives me goosebumps listening to her say that. When I talk to White House officials about this, I think there is this sense that they understand that there needs to be something done. I think Democrats on a whole are trying to figure out what that is. I questioned the president after last Tuesday's elections and asked him specifically, what are the Democrats' plans as it comes to sort of these false narratives on critical race theory, but also sort of culture wars widely. And he said that there was sort of mass confusion out there, that people are worried about their lives and their livelihoods. But I think I get the sense in talking to officials and talking to lawmakers, frankly, that they know that we're in this inflection point. We know that we're in a sort of dangerous moment in American history, and that we have to do something about it. I think that what they're going to do about it, I think, is still definitely evolving and developing.
Jennifer, I saw you react to Yamiche's comments, and I wonder how much of that you hear. I mean, are people sort of whispering to you their thanks for doing something that would scare, frankly, most of us?
Yeah, they're doing more than whispering. I have tremendous support for my community. I've said this so many times. It doesn't take a majority of people to terrorize you. It takes one person and a minority, and unfortunately, that minority is vicious. It's vile. It's loud. It's organized. But overall, the community has been so thankful and so supportive, and that's really what keeps me moving forward as well.
Chris, I believe you were the first person to put on my radar, maybe at the end of this summer, the coalescing of extremists and white supremacists and nationalists and the physical appearances by them at school board meetings. Tell me when you started seeing that and what that looks like now.
So this is an old tactic. It's an old campaign. I mean, I remember I was fresh out of the Army during the Tea Party movement, and Fox News was convincing their viewership to go to town hall hearings on the healthcare bill, what became Obamacare, and scream their heads off. And that would get them TV time. And, it created this perverse incentive. The more outrageous of a constituent you were, the more TV time you got. And then, unfortunately, because Fox News forced it on all of us, everybody started reporting on it. This is the same thing that they've done with CRT. We can't fall into the traps that Republicans are setting for us on this war of words. We can't say that they're banning critical race theory. We can't say that they're banning CRT. In the same way that we shouldn't be saying anything about Antifa. We should be using the word anti-fascist. Instead of saying they're banning critical race theory, we say they're banning critical thinking, because that's what the truth is. These are not just extremist groups that are showing up to these local school board hearings. It's well-funded, some of the most powerful PACs within the GOP world, like Turning Point USA, that's creating websites that's essentially doxing teachers. It is inherent right now in the not just the far right, but conservative media ecosystem, that public servants are the enemy. They're creating, taking the Republican Party and turning it against the people of the United States, not just elected officials, but they think that the views that you and I hold are illegitimate. They are becoming essentially an insurgency. And that's what's most worrying, is when you have Proud Boys showing up in a uniform to these board meetings, standing there with their arms crossed, LARPing like kids who never grow up from Star Wars, and they bring their lightsaber everywhere. Well, now these guys have, their armored vests. This is not a game, and we need to do everything that we can to make sure that law enforcement is fully educated on these extremist groups, that these groups are all wannabe cop killers. We all saw on January 6th how these people really think about cops. They want to kill them, and they did. So, we need to do everything we can within the bounds of the law to disincentivize this kind of crazy, insane behavior.
I hear you say a couple things I just want to unpack, Chris. I mean, your point about anti-fascism, not Antifa, and critical thinking and the education of the history of race and not CRT is a point well taken. But you use the word insurgency. And I wonder if you think that word matters and that that's what's happening and we're not calling it what it actually is on the streets.
I mean, that's what's an insurgency. It's what, my generation of veterans spent 20 years fighting in Iraq and Afghanistan. It's a group of radicalized people who aren't just fighting, the government. They're fighting against the people. They are terrorists. When you have people, and I choose my terms deliberately. What's a terrorist? A terrorist is someone who is using violence and threats to achieve political means. When you have a bunch of armed people, wearing vests, indicating that they're preparing to get in a shootout, showing up at a school board meeting that's usually filled with, a bunch of moms and dads, these people are terrorists. Like, they are making implied threats. And you have guests on who've been victim of it themselves. They are the victims of terrorism.
Jennifer, you've been terrorized. That's right.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I've been criticized for using that word myself, but I wholeheartedly agree with you. We've had people arrested outside of our school board who filmed themselves driving there in a van, saying they had a weapon with them and they were, ready to take us out. Even the people who just come with their violent words, that fear is just purposely crafted and orchestrated to drive this insane narrative that we're the enemy. That unfortunately on my board, I am the enemy, and it's creating this culture in our community that people need to come out and get me. And that's the product. And the product of that is all those emails and those threats that I'm getting.
Yamiche, at the top of the last hour, I showed some of what is being fed to the individuals that Chris is talking about by right-wing media. And obviously everybody's responsible for their own actions, but the media climate is part of it, right? We know that. And we've watched the most high-profile figures on the right do everything from parrot Vladimir Putin's lines on the insurrection to repeat the false claims about election fraud in 2020. So we see some of it. But this is a question, I think, for you and me to wrestle with. Are we missing the story?
I don't think we're missing the story, at least not all of us, because I think in some ways the story is about race, it's about terror, it's about fear, and it's about fear that is targeting people so that they don't have the ability to think critically, and that they don't really get to learn the truth. When we look at what these people are doing, especially when you think of someone like the Proud Boys or a group like the Proud Boys, they're essentially trying to scare people into giving in, scare people into saying, I don't want to fight with these people, I'm going to move on. So in some ways, I think we're not missing the story, but it's a story that needs to continuously be talked about. And we can't just say that this is sort of about an argument over education, right? These are not arguments over math class or geography. These are arguments about race. These are arguments about the very history of our country. And these are arguments about health and science. When you think about the pandemic and people wanting to take down school board members, for mandating masks. This is really, I think, a moment where we as a country really need to focus in and realize that these are not just sort of arguments and people on both sides sort of have a legitimate claim to something. This, in this case, you have one group in a lot of cases that are terrorizing people and that really need to be called out for that. And I think in some ways we can't be lost in the fog of sort of seeing this as a sort of argument when really this is about making people scared to lean on science and making people scared to talk about the truth. And we shouldn't be uncomfortable talking about it. I think, there are some people, especially after the death of George Floyd and sort of a year of racial reckoning, there are some people who are frankly tired of talking about race. You can feel it. You can sense it. When you talk to people, you can sense it when you talk to people who are sort of saying, let's move on from this. Let's turn the page. We can't turn the page because people are still dying at the hands of police, because race is still so much a determinant on so many different issues in this country, whether it's health or education. So I think we need to be not shy in the media of not really talking about what is really happening in people's lives.
So I'm almost out of time, but because of what you just said, Yamiche, I'm going to show this. This is from NBC Nightly News. It's about, well, it speaks for itself. It's about Principal Whitfield.
Dr. James Whitfield, the first black principal at Colleyville Heritage High School, officially removed from his position during an emotional school board meeting. All of it over what he says was a false accusation of promoting
my heart and soul.
The Grapevine Colleyville School District acknowledges there's no evidence Dr. Whitfield promoted critical race theory, the study of law and racial inequality. But anger in the community has focused on an email he sent after George Floyd's murder, in which he said systemic racism was alive and well. Where do you go from here?
I've got a family that needs me. It's bigger than me.
The district told NBC News that Whitfield lost his job due to deficiencies in his performance. The former principal, who had been promoted twice before within the district, denies that claim.
So, Chris, what I want to understand is how the disinformation network weakens the ability of public servants, as we started the segment talking about, as we've all said, the reason Jennifer is here, and whether it's impossible for the truth to get out in a case like this, in a place like this.
The right is going to live in fantasy land, and there's nothing that we can do about it. What we need to do, and what you do on your show, is you give people the truth, and we highlight not the most sensationalized things. We're not making the most interesting things seem important. You're talking about the most important things and making them interesting. And I wish that threats that to local school boards weren't the most interesting thing going on right now, but it is the most important. Yeah. And what we need to do is make sure that our friends and neighbors who, don't watch TV, who aren't on Facebook, who aren't politicized, are well educated on this stuff. And we need to make sure that people are still reading newspapers, and a lot of folks of my generation don't subscribe to anything because we get it all on the internet, or you can use a different browser to get to New York Times for free or whatever. We need to start paying for journalism, because without local journalists, this stuff never gets reported. It doesn't end up in that free newspaper that a lot of towns have that ends up on your grandma's doorstep, and your grandma's the one who's definitely going to vote in every election. So we need to support local journalism in order to make sure that bad actors are held accountable.
Jennifer Jenkins, I'll give you a last word if you want to say anything else.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I agree with all the sentiment tonight, but, I think what's really important is for this conversation to continue and to be blunt and to be right in people's faces. Here in Florida, it's not just a group of moms fighting me or a angry mob of a community. It's state house representatives. It's the governor coming here and giving a platform to those representatives to say there's a special place in hell for me. I mean, this is completely supported by our elected officials on the right. And we need to be bold and blunt about it and put an end to it, because it's just out of control.
Jennifer Jenkins, thank you for being bold and blunt. We're really grateful that you're part of this conversation. Yamiche and Chris, stick around. When we come back on this Veterans Day, the ongoing fight and struggle about how best to root out extremism among 4 members of the military. Retired Army Reserve Colonel and U.S. Congressman Anthony Brown joins our conversation in just a minute. Plus, New accusations from former Trump aides that the disgraced ex-president's administration ran a Gestapo-like purge operation bent on eliminating anyone deemed insufficiently loyal. And a victory for science and protecting our kids as a federal judge strikes down the ban on mask mandates in the state of Texas. That decision coming as, unfortunately, cases of the virus have started to tick back up. Deadline White House continues after a quick break. Don't go anywhere.